has a book that just came out called Boy No Good, which does the same thing, and there are other books that have been doing the same thing, and what they're all doing is telling you, hey, this is the post-statehood Hawaii story. And as soon as we exchanged agribusiness that was centered here in Hawaii for building hotels and retirement homes for people who aren't from here, we started selling ourselves out to outside interests, and things just started spiraling to the point where you get this urban sprawl coming upon the sacred place that Tom depicts in the book here. Okay, I decided to write this novel after I'd written my last book, which the development issue under examination at that point was the H3 highway, which was $1 billion highway connecting two military bases on Oahu that was vigorously fought for almost 20 years and finally built anyway, and built despite the socioeconomic impact statement that predicted everything that's happened since, which is the destruction of subsistence lifestyles, the destruction of traditional families, crime, substance abuse. They didn't know about crystal meth, but they might as well have written it in this thing that they wrote in the early 1970s, and that was the development issue that I explored at that time. That 1970s development turned into 1980s development, which was Japanese investment in Hawaii, which involved purchase of every single golf course in the state except one, and construction of several other golf courses, purchase of hotel properties, and the whole thing back in the 80s. The book that I wrote was nonfiction, and my good friend Chris McKinney, who's a novelist, read it and really liked it, and he said, now you have to take off the chains and write a novel. And the difference in writing fiction and nonfiction is that with fiction you get access to point of view, and you can start to imagine how these people think and do these sorts of things. It's researched as though it were nonfiction, and it's presented as fiction because it gives us the way to imagine, how somebody might want to do something like Tom's character Robert Conway does. I thought about what my conflict would be. H3, would I write something about back in the 80s? Would I write something about golf course development when all the billions of Japanese investment money was coming in? Because a lot of my research involved interviewing people who were involved in this stuff at that time for my prior book. And I thought, no, let's do something about now, or something that even predicts what might happen in the next few years. And I thought about maybe rail is going to be my major central conflict, and then I thought, no, let's make it a multi-tower development on the North Shore of Oahu with legalized casino gambling. And that's our conflict here. And what we have are 4 point of view characters who have different stakes in whether or not this deal goes down. One of them is a state senator who's using his support of this development to fuel his run for governor. One of them is a Hawaiian rights activist named Ikaika Nahimi Pono, who of course is opposed to this because he has these sorts of ancestral connections to the land that's in question. One of them is an up-and-coming wannabe, just like these fixer-developer guys from the 80s, who was in fact mentored by one who is named Alan Ho in my book. His name is Sean Hayashi. He's the fixer. And then the final one is a guy named Keikoa Meyer, who is an underworld figure who wants to parlay his involvement with the gambling debt that the senator guy has to him into being more of a legitimate player in this gambling business. The scene I'm going to read is from the point of view of Sean Hayashi, who's the fixer. And the scene takes place at Windward Community College on Oahu, and it's at a big long conference table in a room that is a public meeting, so they're surrounded by 50 or 60 students and other people who are opposed to this development. And at one side of the table, you have Sean Hayashi and representatives from his company, which is a Chinese billionaire from Macau who is providing all the money to buy this land and build these towers and push legalized gambling through the legislature. On the other side of the table, you have Ikaika Nahimi Pono, and you have a Hawaiian studies teacher named Makana Irving Kekumu, and you have various other players who are here to hear what the deal is being offered offered by the Chinese company. Okay. Sean Hayashi, as the fixer, by the way, is the intermediary between the Chinese company and local political establishment and local values and the way things work around here. That seems to be what he thinks his value is. And he turns to Michael Prescott, the representative from Sing USA is the company, and he says, he's talking about scholarships, he says with a smile. Scholarships for Hawaiian students. Sean looked around the room to see if any of the other students themselves had brightened up at this, but the dutifully angry looks remained. Here they were, willing to sacrifice their own futures over some mystical nonsense like bones. Well, they'd come around eventually, even if the scholarship thing didn't work out and they had to throw a few dollars on the table, is how Alan Ho had explained it to him. When Sean had brought up his idea of offering them a building, a Hawaiian cultural center of some kind, Alan Ho had simply laughed, saying, I like the way you think, but let's see if we can get them to come around for a few trinkets first. As Alan explained it, you could look all the way back to the Mahele, that coup that had brought the wonderful concept of private land ownership, of fluid capital assets to the islands back in the mid-19th century, or to the opening ceremony of the H3 freeway, when a Hawaiian group had been persuaded to form a chant to make peace with the development. Many Hawaiian sovereignty activists, including Ikaika Pono over here, had risked their lives opposing. Decades later, that same group could be held up as the blanket native Hawaiian acceptance of the freeway, simply because someone had realized you were dealing with people who likely lived 2 and 3 generations to a 3-bedroom spec home, were unemployed or at least underemployed, likely without health insurance, their kids brainwashed by TV into thinking they deserved to wear a $200 pair of sneakers. Here they were, standing behind something with no practical value. Their cultural convictions, all you had to do was find the cracks, strike the right deal, one that gives them a way out, lets them hold on to their principles somehow. We're talking about real educational opportunities that could change lives, Sean said. Ikaika Pono then turned to the young heavyset woman on his right, the one with the maroon polo shirt, and said, Okay, Kanoe. Though Kanoe looked only to be in her mid-20s, you couldn't detect a whiff of nervousness. Sean was sure she'd start peppering them with a list of historical tidbits delineating how this piece of land was stolen, and these water rights were grabbed from the Hawaiian people, and so on and so forth. But to his surprise, she let the moment stretch just a bit, in a way that began to worry him, although he couldn't explain exactly why. This silence of hers, it was a composed and confident silence, one that said, just give me a moment while I think of a way to put what I'm about to say in terms an idiot like you would be able to understand. Finally, she looked Prescott in the eye, and in a very even tone she said, let me try to explain why we might have a problem with this memorandum of agreement, and with the idea of advisory committees, and particularly with this notion of scholarships. She paused again, like a concerned parent reasoning with a headstrong teenager. And then she went on. Getting us to sign this memo, it's going to make you look like you are pushing this thing through, that you did some backroom deal with just one small group of Hawaiians and got some sort of buy-in. What you've got to do is hold hearings on this stuff and let people know that what you're trying to push through, and do it in a way that doesn't look rushed, because honestly, it looks like you guys are trying to get away with something. No way! In 3 sentences, he just nailed Sean's entire strategy, a tried and true strategy that had worked on project after project for decades. He had to redirect, fast. Oh, I'm glad you brought up this thing about scholarships, he said. We're talking about full scholarships to WCC for up to 50 Native Hawaiian students. Vice Chancellor Barnes, he said, turning to the UH contingent seated over to the left of Mylene Cheng. Could you explain for us what that means? Mitch Barnes, the graying former frat boy who served as WCC's Vice Chancellor for Student Success, was leaning way back on his chair down at the end of the table, next to his interim associate vice chancellor. And who on earth made up these titles anyway? The two of them were flanked by their personal assistants, a silken-haired petite hottie on the tail end of her Ocean's 808 mid-pack reunion club days named Marsha Yoshikawa, and a real matron named Eileen Fujiuchi. The vice-chancellor sat like he was lounging on a sofa in someone's living room, his hands folded in front of him on his prosperous lap. This guy was howling, with double italics and maybe even a capital H, and for a moment Sean wondered why so many of these UH administrators were imported FOB Howleys, with absolutely no concept of the context of the place they just moved to, and at what point along the career path at some mainland university had things gone wrong enough for you to wind up at a place like Windward Community College. All of this flew through Sean's head in an instant, because old Mitch Barnes himself was happy to join in the conversation right away, saying, "Aloha, everybody! I'd be happy to talk about what this means, at least for the Windward Community College Ohana." This was the first time Sean had heard a Hawaiian word spoken in a lilting southern accent. But since this is all still at the speculative stage, and since I've only been here in Hawaii for a bit over 2 weeks, at this point I can only offer the mildest form of opinion. Sean hoped no one else noticed how obviously the guy was trying to use charm and a couple of long and empty sentences to try to think of something useful to say. He then went off on a long tangent on the mission of community colleges in general and spoke about how WCC faced particular challenges in light of the current budget situation and so forth. 3 minutes in and he'd yet to say anything at all of substance. But that was just fine with Sean. If nothing else, the subject had been successfully changed. But in the end, I think you people are going to be happy with the opportunities these scholarships provide. You people? Redirect! Redirect! You people? How the fuck could he have said you people? Hadn't Eileen Fujiuchi just taught him that much? That you people would be taken as code for generally overly typically howly affliction of ingrained unacknowledged racism? She could teach him about Ohana, but then let him go around sprouting you people? Redirect! Redirect! Thank you very much, Dr. Barnes. Sean said. He didn't have to look to the other side of the table. He could feel the glare shooting out, just as he could hear the muffled murmuring and sighing from around the room. And Associate Vice Chancellor Funai. And was that how you're supposed to address the guy? Should he have said interim? Earlier, you were sharing with me some deep concerns about enrollment next academic year. To Sean's relief, Funai jumped right in with the enthusiasm of a game show host. What we're talking about here is a potential increase of 7 to 12%. I don't have the capacity to handle that kind of increase, and our financial aid office doesn't have the resources to provide any more that we're already providing for. Funai waved his arms around excitedly as he spoke, going on about the college budget and salary allotments and the dry-up of overload pay and lecturer money, inhibiting my ability to schedule extra sessions and so on, and how the extra tuition these scholarships provided would help him bridge the gap, to help him graduate students on time, which to Sean sounded like code for shovel people through in huge classrooms regardless of what they learn. In translation, Funai confirmed by saying, so they can get their degrees. He went on. The money Seng USA is willing to provide for the college above and beyond these 50 scholarships is going to help me provide more classes and more opportunities for WCC students. Oh. Here is introducing yet another carrot Sean had yet to even mention, a blanket endowment for WCC. And even when we're not talking about the 50 scholarships, it's important to consider that my enrollment here is over 30% Native Hawaiian. We're the major educational opportunity for these Hawaiian communities, Waimanalo, Kahaluu, all the way up to the North Shore. And let's face it, the days of asking for that kind of appropriation from the legislature are over. They're over. The guy sat back in his seat, and he folded his spindly arms. And Sean thought, perfect. Now these Hawaiians, now they had to choose. They had to choose between educating not just 50 but hundreds of their community's children. They had to choose between that and the possibility of a bunch of bones someone had buried in the ground hundreds of years ago. Education for you people or bones? It was perfect. I enjoyed reading that in front of the new Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs and the former Chancellor of UH Hilo Rose Singh.